structure is called a narrative structure. This can be found in most Hollywood films. And this is what the structure, this is how it's broken down. Most commonly, right now, the great thing for me that I'm older is that I get to take my kids to see all these Marvel and DC movies, all these superhero movies. So I'm getting to relive my childhood with my children. It's kind of cool. But that's really what the narrative structure is. It's like that hero's journey. There's a status quo, there's an inciting incident or something that changes the status quo, there's something that raises the stakes, there's the moment of truth, and then there's the outcome or the new status quo. So probably my favorite one growing up, I mean, you can pick yours. You got Superman, Batman, you got so many different ones. The one that I like the most is Spider-Man. Are you familiar with Spider-Man?
Yes.
Yeah, familiar with Spider-Man? So who is Spider-Man? Who is he really? What is his name? Does anybody remember?
Peter Parker.
Parker, yes. Peter Parker, absolutely. So Peter Parker is who Spider-Man really is. That's the status quo. And if we think about who Peter Parker is, who is he?
He's just a regular boy who got bit by a spider.
Okay, so he's a regular boy. He's a bit of a nerd, right?
Yeah.
He's super bright. He's got this low-key crush on Mary Jane, who's gone to school with forever. That's who Peter Parker is. That's the status quo. He gets picked on. That's who he is, right? So that's the status quo. But then there was an inciting incident, and you just mentioned it. What was the inciting incident or the thing that happened to change the status quo? What happened to him?
He got bit by a spider.
There we go. So he got bit by a radioactive spider, and now his superhero powers begin to show themselves. So he's no longer just a nerd that gets bullied on. He's this nerd, but now he's got all this superhuman power, the strength, his spider sense. He can latch on the walls. Some stories say that he can shoot webbing from his hands. Other stories say that he's created webbing. But either way, we know that the status quo has changed. And then there's something that happens that raises the stakes. Do you remember what happened that raises the stakes? There's a famous line from Spider-Man, and something happened to make this line come to fruition. Does anybody remember?
Was it when he kissed?
No! His Uncle Ben dies,
okay,
right? And Uncle Ben said to him, with great power comes great responsibility. And it was at that moment that Uncle Ben dies that he realizes that he was being irresponsible and chasing after something that just was out of character for him. So when Uncle Ben dies, that raises the stakes for him. Now he's not just using his superpowers to benefit himself. He's really starting to consider, how can I use my superpowers to benefit mankind? That was when the stakes were raised. So then the moment of truth comes. In multiple stories, what always happens is some villain shows up and begins terrorizing the city. And at this point, there's only one person that can really help the city. And who is that? Spider-Man. So the moment of truth comes where Spider-Man has to decide, am I going to use my powers to benefit myself, or I'm going to use it to help the greater good? And in this case, we know that Peter Parker creates the alter ego of Spider-Man. He's got his suit, he's got his webbing, he's done his training, he's got his super wits about him. He goes up against the villain, and what tends to happen every time Spider-Man faces a villain?
They know him.
Yeah,
They know him.
And then they almost die. They usually die or defeated.
He ends up, there's always this tug of war back and forth between good and evil. And when it seems like Spider-Man is on the brink of losing, some way, somehow, he pulls out the victory, right? So now that's the new status quo. We have a superhero that has been through all of this, and now we know on the back end, that's how he ended up becoming Spider-Man. So that is the narrative structure, and pretty much every film is that way. You've got your status quo, you've got your inciting incident, you have your raising of the stakes, you have your moment of truth, and then you have a new status quo. So when we're thinking about our personal essays, maybe we were one way before, there was something that happened to us that challenged us to raise the stakes in our life. Then the moment of truth came when we had to make that decision where we're going to be the old us or the new us, and then we have our new selves if we decided to make that decision. Make sense?
Yeah.